Welcome back to episode 5 of the Boilermaker Breakdown podcast. I'm your host, Joey, and I'm here with Ethan Woody. And today we're talking about this Minnesota game. A lot of positives, I think, to take away from that game, as well as a lot of negatives, kind of a really up and down showing, which has kind of been the story of Purdue's season so far in football. And then we'll be previewing that Northwestern game. But first, I want to talk about something that's kind of taken over Purdue Twitter a little bit, and the talk that is this year championship or bust for Purdue? And I think it's a good start to just get the answer to that basic question from you, Ethan, before we get too far into it.
So I think part of the debate is people answering two different questions or hearing two different questions when they hear championship or bust. Because championship or bust can be used to talk about this specific team in this year and the program as a whole. Do I think it's championship bust for Purdue as a whole as a program? Of course not. Do I think it's championship or bust for this team? Yes, and I think they've said so. Painter's gone on the record. Players have gone on the record that they think they're the number one team in the country. They think they're the best team in the country, and anything short of a national title would be a disappointment. And I think if we talk to Purdue fans, sort of by and large, they would agree with that. Right now, if we lose a 2-point game to number one Duke or whatever in the Final Four, I don't think anyone's going to be coming away from this calling the team a failure. But I do think there would be, even then, a sense of disappointment of, this was the year, this was the special team, and we couldn't quite get it done.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that's why I think it is kind of championship or bust a little bit. I just look at it as, even with the amount of respect that anyone has for Matt Painter, which I think a lot of people, it's an incredible amount of respect from a coaching perspective. There's no doubt this Purdue program will be back at this stage to some extent after this year. I mean, even looking at next year, you project this roster to be deep and talented again, even despite losing Braden Smith, Trey Kaufman-Wren, and Fletcher Lawyer and Oscar Clough. I mean, they still return quite a bit next year. And so I think that it's unfair to say this Purdue team won't get back, but there are very few opportunities like this on paper, like ever. Not just talking about Purdue. This Purdue team on paper is as talented as any preseason number one team on paper going into the year. I can't even remember the last time a team had this much preseason buzz, like in general, at all in college basketball. There's so much preseason buzz around this Purdue basketball team. Part of that is a once in a generation player in Braden Smith. I mean, he's on track to potentially break a record that stood for like 30 something years. It's a once in a lifetime type point guard. It's a once in a generation type point guard. No matter how good your talent evaluation, no matter how good your development, no matter how good your recruiting is in the future, you probably won't find another Braden Smith because there just isn't another Braden Smith. And so when you have an opportunity like that, you can't wait around for another one to come. Like, that's why this year's is championship or bust. I think that's why the mentality has been shown from inside the program, like you said, from Trey Kaufman-Wren, from Braden Smith, from Matt Painter, from Fletcher Lawyer, like very publicly and outwardly, it's championship or bust.
Yeah, and I think, people like Craig Bowers who are saying that, Purdue is going to be back in these positions in the future, right, are 100% correct. I mean, we've seen this dating back to, the first team that I followed of Purdue basketball, even before I started attending Purdue, and I knew that's where I was going to go to school, was the Dakota Mathias, Vince Edwards, that senior year team. Kind of watched the tournament run with Big E the year before, and then had that team the following year. And that team started 4 seniors, like a legendary senior class, and sophomore year Carson Edwards, and an injury to Isaac Haas in the first round of the tournament kind of ended that run before it began, so to speak. And then kind of after that, I was like, well, where does Purdue go from here? And then that was the magical Carson Edwards run year. And then after Carson left, it was, well, where does Purdue go from here? Was this the end of the Painter era? And then, it took them 2 years after Carson to like fully reload. COVID didn't help, I'm sure. But then there was the Jaden Ivey, Travion Williams team. And, sophomore year, Zach Edey kind of starting to come into his own. And after that, it was back-to-back National Player of the Year Zach Edey seasons. And then as soon as Edey leaves, it's Braden here again. And now running with TKR. So, yeah, I think Purdue as a program is one of the healthiest programs in the country, right up with the likes of Houston in terms of teams over the last 5 years or so, that really no matter who is going to be there, they're going to be top 10 teams, right? However, I do want to put a little asterisk here as someone who covers the NFL extensively, college football, just sports more generally. I do think Purdue fans tend to get into a little bit of a dangerous mindset with the idea of like, well, there's always a next time. Because that's true until it isn't anymore, right? Like there's always a next time until there just isn't. And that's true of championship windows across sports. You never know what can happen any given year, any given game. And that's why I think it's dangerous to plan on these like 2-year, 3-year plans. It's one of the reasons I was so adamantly against the idea of like punting on last season with the anticipation of being awesome this year, because, I don't want to speak it into existence, but one knee turning the wrong way in a practice in, November could ruin a national championship run before it begins, right? You never know in these kinds of things how things are going to go. You never know when the next UConn will pop up to, Purdue's Purdue and just be a dominant, the likes of which you haven't seen in 5 years. And well, Purdue had a championship caliber team any other year, but this year there was simply a better team out there. You just never know. And we're seeing that in the NFL right now with the Baltimore Ravens. They were a common Super Bowl pick this year. They've been, they've won their division multiple years in a row. Lamar Jackson, 2-time MVP. They're 1-5 right now, and it's seemingly all falling apart. John Harbaugh has been the coach since 2007, and people are calling for his job. Like, you just never know when your run is going to end. And I think that's not to put too much pressure on this Purdue team. Like, if they don't win the title this year, is pain or done. Of course, I don't think that at all. But I do think Purdue fans are a little too comfortable with the idea of there's always a next time. And I want to see this team operate with the urgency of, we don't know what's going to come next. Let's win one right now.
Yeah, and I think that's where they've done a good job of that, very publicly. I think leadership-wise, it's the right guys. At first we did hear Daniel Jacobson and Jakari Harris being like, we want to win a national championship, and that's great. But to hear guys like Braden Smith and Fletcher Lawyer and Trey Kaufman-Wren get on Field of 68 and other shows like that, and Matt Painter, I believe it was the John Rothstein podcast where he said this. I know he's done a lot of big ones this offseason, but they get on these huge national shows and say, hey, we very publicly are like, we're a national championship team and that's our goal and that's what we're focused on. Like, we're not messing around. We're not here for moral victories. We're not worried about next year. We're worried about right now. We're worried about winning a national championship this year. That gives me a lot of belief as a Purdue fan, I think. But moving on to a less championship-oriented program, the Purdue football team. After a tough loss to Minnesota, a game that I really felt like Purdue outplayed Minnesota for a large part of that game. Some unfortunate turnovers. You had the Devin Mockabee trick play that didn't work out. You had the Ryan Brown pick six by Coy Perrick that really hurt in a time where Purdue kind of needed some offensive momentum. And I think that my general sentiment kind of recapping this game to start is almost a flip of what we've talked about. A lot of times we've talked about how the offense has been good enough to keep you in the game and even possibly win the game. And the defense just couldn't find any shred of traction to even build on. And in this game, that just wasn't true. The defense, I thought, was good enough to win this game. Only gave up, I believe, 20 points on defense. You had the pick six, which is completely unfair to count that on the defense. Obviously, they weren't out there to give that play up. So what were your kind of general takeaways? Did you kind of get the same general sentiment where the defense was good enough this week and it was, kind of a new thing where the offense just wasn't good enough to get it done this week?
Yeah, the defense was awesome. You could argue they really only gave up 17 points. One of those field goals came on another turnover. We gave Minnesota a very short field, and they didn't get a first down and had to kick a field goal. So, I mean, the defense did their part. Without those turnovers, Purdue wins this game 20-17. We held Minnesota at a 5 of 15 on third down. They only held the ball for 25 minutes. 262 yards of total offense. Like, I didn't think this Purdue defense had that kind of performance in them, even against an offense of Minnesota's, like we talked about in the preview for this game, that's not very explosive, right? We thought Purdue had a good chance in this game because Minnesota's not the kind of offense that's going to punish you quite the way that Illinois and USC and some of those other teams we've been playing are. Minnesota's a very methodical, plotting, inefficient offense. This defense was giving up lightning quick touchdown drives to FCS teams at the beginning of the year. Like, I really didn't think they had this performance in them, and all credit to them. Tony Grimes, my goodness, the return of Tony Grimes. I just want to start on defense here before we get into the offense. Tony Grimes, man, he had a rough day against USC, I think it was. Maybe it was Notre Dame. But, I mean, the way he played in this game was life-changing for this defense. I mean, he was like prime Darrell Revis out there, just shutting down his man. I think he got called for one holding penalty, and that was pretty much the only error he made all game. And they kept going after him because he kept matching up on Minnesota's top receivers, and he really held his own. Even as the rest of the secondary gave up a little bit here and there, the fact that he was out there and able to shut things down on his side of the field was really big for this team.
Yeah, I think that kind of you saw a little bit of the ceiling with Tony Grimes. Like, he definitely is capped a little bit. He's not going to be able to shut down, elite wide receivers like a Mekhi Lemon from USC. But when you match him up with the Minnesotas of the world, he's every bit as talented as the guys he's matching up against. And I think it showed against Minnesota. I thought Miles Slusher also had a pretty solid game as well back there at safety. I thought he made he had the tip interception. I just kind of think this whole Purdue defense kind of played a lot better. Like, they didn't give up the massive plays. They weren't giving up chunk plays every other play. They made it hard. It was really, really hard for Minnesota to move the football. And that was kind of the big takeaway. Minnesota could not run the football on Purdue. That was huge, I thought. Credit to the defensive line. I thought the defensive line had a really good game. Would have had an even better game if it wasn't for a couple of face mask penalties on third down sacks. It gets you off the field a little bit. They would have had an incredible game if you don't make those kind of mental mistakes that didn't really affect the play, but really kind of overtook a good play. But just overall, I thought the Purdue defense played a lot more together. There weren't busted coverages. There weren't miscommunications. There weren't a plethora of broken tackles. When when a guy took a good angle and was in front of the runner, 9 times out of 10 the runner went down. The Purdue guy made the tackle in the open field. I thought the defense played very well.
Minnesota averaged 1.7 yards per carry. Their starting running back, you take the sacks of Drake Lindsay, the Minnesota quarterback, out. Their starting running back, Darius Taylor, one of the best backs in the Big Ten, averaged 2.3 yards per carry. I mean, that's phenomenal run defense. We weren't giving up anything. He had a long run of 9 yards. Right, 0 explosive runs in this game. Absolutely phenomenal work by the defense. Pass defense. Lindsay dropped back to pass 45 times, 232 passing yards. It's a 5.2 yards per attempt average. That's not good. That's really efficient defensive coverage. He was a volume passer. Completed less than 50% of his passes. This was a great defensive performance all around, I thought, which is why it's really unfortunate that the offense kind of self-imploded. And we can kind of dive into some of the offensive numbers here because they were this was easily the worst offensive performance of the year, besides maybe the USC game. But this is particularly vexing because unlike USC, which is a top 25 team, this Minnesota team is a team on caliber with Purdue, right? When I was watching this game, it never really felt like there was one team outclassing the other. And if anything, it really felt like for most of the game, Purdue was the better team in theory, right? The better team. You're only the better team if you actually win the game. And down the stretch, Purdue beat themselves more than Minnesota beat them, but that's still losing. And we can kind of get into what the offense did here if you like.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing about the offense for me was that it was the part of the offense that had been working all year. It was the passing game that really let Purdue down. They were able to run the football. Malachi Smith had a couple of really nice runs. He had the I forget exactly how long it was, the 40-ish yard run in the first quarter for a touchdown. That was huge. I think he looked great in the few snaps that he played. He looks awesome carrying the football. Devin Mockabee had 98 yards on 21 carries, almost 5 yards a carry. Um, uh, Ryan Brown even added 61 yards on the ground and a touchdown. Like, I think the ground game played well, or was very strong. I thought the offensive line had one of their better games of the season. I thought they held up well in pass protection. I thought they were able to really establish themselves in the run game because of the offensive line. But quite frankly, I just think Ryan Brown wasn't good enough this game. I think there were a few timely drops from the wide receivers that didn't help, but I think in large part, I just don't think Ryan Brown was good enough tonight. Not tonight. Obviously, we are recording this a few days later, but on Saturday night, I don't think Ryan Brown turned in a good enough performance, and I don't think it was an A+ performance on Ryan Brown either. I don't think that's saying that he couldn't have turned in a performance good enough to win this game, or he's not a good enough player to win this game. I just don't think he played very well, unfortunately.
I'm with you on that. He averaged 4.8 yards per attempt. Or sorry, he averaged 5.1 yards per attempt. The team as a whole averaged 4.8. That's less efficient than the very inefficient Minnesota passing game I was just talking about. And I think it's time to talk about Ryan Brown and this passing attack more broadly, kind of what we've seen over the course of the season. Because you're right, the running game was awesome. We had 253 rushing yards in this game. Right, Mockabee obviously the bell cow there, but Malachi Singleton, Ryan Brown, even Malachi Thomas came in and had 21 yards on carries. Right, pretty much the only player who really didn't get that involved was Antonio Harris. He and Malachi Thomas seems kind of trade off weeks where they got the hot hand behind Mockabee. But I think there were three aspects that really kind of bit the offense: interceptions, particularly from Ryan Brown. But we'll get to the Mockabee trick play later. Drops by the receivers. Purdue receivers were credited with 6 drops in this game. And I feel like all of them came on third down or on deep passes. And penalties. We'll get more into the penalties in a little bit, but I want to start with Ryan Brown in this passing attack because I think it's time to talk about, what is this passing attack? We've kind of been talking all season about how effective it is. We have a lot of different receivers, maybe none of whom are great, but a bunch of them are good. And Ryan Brown can really sling it, and we've had an efficient passing game. I don't know how true that is. None of these passing performances have been terribly efficient. And I talked about this last week against Illinois when he went 30 for 50 for 302 yards. You look through his game logs. Week 1 was incredible against Ball State, 18 of 26 for 311 yards. Next week against Southern Illinois, he didn't really have to do a lot. He went 14 of 23 for 170. USC was probably the last solid performance he turned in. The turnovers really did us in that game, but 24 of 39 for 305 is a good performance. Not amazing, but definitely good enough. But since then, he's gone 21 for 34 for 250, 30 of 50 for 302, and then this past week was definitely his worst, 21 of 40 for 203 yards. This is a volume passing attack, is what I'm trying to say. It is not efficient down to down. Whether that's because Brown is missing receivers aren't catching the ball, the offensive line isn't giving him time to execute, whatever the case may be on any given play. And you notice this, how difficult a time it feels the offense has of staying on schedule, where we're not going 5-yard gain, 3-yard gain, first down. We're not going 8-yard gain, 7-yard gain, first down, right? It's a lot of big miss, short run, third down conversion. Or big miss, short run, third down, dropped pass, or incomplete, or whatever it might be. And then the next drive will be big run, short pass, long pass, touchdown. And then the drive after that, it'll be run, missed pass, barely get a first down conversion on fourth down, missed pass, deep throw down the field. Right? And that's kind of what you're seeing drive to drive in these games where he's putting up numbers, but it never feels like the offense is in sync and in rhythm and on schedule. And that shows up in the numbers where these are just not efficient passing performances, even if the box score says he threw for a lot of yards.
Yeah, I think part of it is he kind of has this weird ability to miss easy throws. I don't know how much we've talked about it offline, but there's times where he just kind of throws a screen pass in the dirt, or I think back, That big last series against Minnesota on offense, I believe it was second or third down. He had a guy open 10 yards downfield, would have completely gotten the holding call back and made manageable and needed a good ball. It wasn't close. It wasn't a catchable ball. But his receivers have to help him out to a certain extent. When he does put it on the money, he can't drop it. And having 6 drops, at least half of which, to my memory, were on a third down, like that just can't happen from a receiving group. It can't happen if Purdue expects to win games. This team isn't good enough to not beat teams on the margins, and that's losing games on the margins right there, is dropping passes on third down. That's one of the easiest ways to lose football games, is to start dropping passes on third down.
Yeah, I think when you watch the tape on Ryan Brown, he's very accurate over the middle of the field, which is kind of where Purdue's passing attack has thrived, when he's hitting those like slant passes or those tight end seam routes. We're kind of getting some chunk plays that way. He's very hit or miss outside the numbers. And that's a problem because his receivers aren't reliable enough to catch everything when he does hit them in the chest. And so it creates this sort of self-feeding cycle of he'll be inaccurate outside the numbers, and then he'll laser a strike 15 yards right down the hash that'll bounce off the receiver's hands. Right? When he's inaccurate, they're not catching the passes. And when he is accurate, sometimes even then they're not catching the passes. And that's just not a recipe for an efficient passing attack.
Yeah, I completely agree with you there. I will be honest, you did cut out for a minute there in your monologue, so I did miss about the first half of that. But I feel like I kind of got the general sentiment, and that was kind of in agreement with me, is that Brown has been inefficient at times, but when he is efficient, it's the receiving group has not exactly helped him out.
In short, I was saying that he's very accurate over the middle of the field, but not as much outside the numbers.
I think that's
kind of where you see that split. Like when you watch the tape, he can be very erratic to the outside, and he hits some of those throws, but that's where he tends to miss. Whereas over the middle of the field, when he's got those RPO passes where he's just kind of slinging those darts, receivers have to be ready. And there's a lot of them where he's hitting that sort of just over the linebacker, hitting them right in the hands before the safety can get there, and it's just sort of bouncing off and going into the dirt. And that's where it's really frustrating, because even when he is on time and in rhythm and hitting his receivers, they're not always catching it.
I think that tracks eye test wise, and I think that to couple with that, I think that this receivers group has really kind of gotten by on being the best of the position groups on a bad football team, because they are definitely not without fault. And I think I am as guilty as anyone of kind of building this group up as this awesome group without faults. And I do think that this kind of every position group on a 2 and 4 team, the way Purdue is, has left something to be desired to some extent. But moving into a more positive sphere, I want to go into this Northwestern game. I think gut reaction based on our conversation, I would our previous conversations, I'd say we could both kind of agree this is probably the most winnable Power 5 game on Purdue's schedule, most winnable conference game. Kind of getting your thoughts on the matchup kind of from a general overview.
So I think, like you said, Northwestern is definitely the most winnable of Purdue's upcoming games, or any game we played so far. They did beat Penn State. Now, Penn State has fallen apart for sure. They also beat, I believe, UCLA as well. Let me double check that. Yes, they beat UCLA as well, and UCLA just beat Michigan State. So they do have some wins over what are other bottom feeder Big Ten schools, but are Big Ten wins nonetheless that Purdue does not have. They're currently tied with Michigan, Oregon, and Nebraska in the standings at 2-1, or Washington too, looks like. So again, that's coming against some of the other teams that are bottom feeders. But would you favor Purdue against UCLA or Penn State right now? I don't think I would. So as much as we can sit here and say Northwestern is gettable, they definitely are. This is not a game where I go into it thinking like, oh yeah, Purdue's got this one.
Yeah, I might give Purdue 6.5 against Penn State right now. I'm going to be honest, but I wanted to get your kind of gauge on how much stock you put into that Northwestern win over Penn State. Just one of the most baffling kind of storylines of the season is a Penn State team just falling apart after a loss that really wasn't like bad or I don't feel like that Oregon game was a huge emotional downfall and they just kind of collapsed. How much stock do you put into that Northwestern win over Penn State last week?
Not a lot. I mean, they lost Drew Aller late in the game, and I mean he hadn't been playing good before that, but that sort of killed any chance that Penn State was going to be able to pull out the win there. When the news came down on Sunday that James Franklin was out, I don't think that surprised anyone. I mean, the way he walked off the field on Saturday night, you could tell he knew this was his last time walking off the field as Penn State's head coach. He just had this moment of like he was walking towards the tunnel, and there were some Penn State fans there in the corner who were trying to encourage him, and he was talking to his family and looking around like a senior on senior day. And I think he knew going into that game if he lost again, especially a game like that, he was done. And when momentum is such a difficult thing, and a lot of like analysts don't tend to put a lot of stock into it because it's not something you can really quantify. And every time we think a team is out of momentum, they pull out a win over someone who has all the juice, right? So it's very much this thing that exists when we want to paint narratives and something that gets bucked whenever results don't line up with that. But I do think there is a sense of Penn State being in a total tailspin. The Oregon loss, double overtime home loss to a top 5 team in the country is nothing to apologize for. But then sort of getting blitzed by UCLA the next week, I think really broke this team. And for as much as we want to make fun of that UCLA team, they do have a very talented quarterback in Nico Iamaleava, who, as much as we can say he, wasn't as good as he wanted to be, and that's why Tennessee was happy to let him walk, and Tennessee isn't regretting their choice by any means. Like, his talent is undeniable, and the pieces around him at UCLA are really, really bad. So there was bound to be a game where he just sort of took over and dominated an otherwise good defense this year, and then it happened to come against Penn State. And then, we saw what happened on Saturday against Northwestern. In summation, I don't put a ton of stock into it, but it is a data point because it's not the first time Northwestern has beaten a team that on paper you'd think they should lose to. So, we get on here and we say all Purdue's games this year, Northwestern's the one. Well, right now they look like a not talented, extremely well-coached football team. Whereas Purdue looks like a not talented and very undisciplined football team. And that does not bode well for that matchup at all.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you. I do think that lack of Northwestern talent, though, does really kind of give Purdue a shot here because I do think that there is a little bit of talent on this Purdue football team. I think it's not the best roster we've ever seen put together, and it certainly isn't the most star-studded Purdue roster we've ever seen put together, even for the ones that had a lot of holes in them. There is a little bit of high-end talent. I do think that Nitro Tuggle has this level of athleticism and talent that it is a little bit above a basement dweller, Big Ten team. I think that he has a pretty high ceiling. I think Devin Mockabee is the kind of guy that you put him up against Northwestern. There's a very real chance that Mockabee goes for 150, 175 all-purpose yards against Northwestern. That is not remotely out of the realm of possibility. I think there are guys on this Purdue team who are capable of putting up really good games against teams like Northwestern. And I think that's the pathway here is you need guys to play well. And I think that on the offensive side of the ball against Minnesota, guys didn't play well. But if guys play well against Northwestern and the defense plays well again, I think this Purdue team beats Northwestern because I think the roster is better than Northwestern's at its best.
Yeah, I'm not going to disagree with you there necessarily. I don't think there's a huge gap in the roster talent between these two teams, but if you're looking for individual difference makers, you can definitely argue Purdue has more guys that fit that description than Northwestern does. One area I do think Northwestern has a pretty big advantage is on the offensive line. Their offensive line is not amazing, but it's pretty good. They've only given up 10 total sacks in the year. They average, what is it, 4.8, I believe. Yes, 4.8 yards per carry as a team. Caleb Tiernan, right tackle, kind of came into the year as potentially like a day two kind of buzzy name for the draft. And he hasn't had an amazing year, but he's an NFL guy that Purdue just simply doesn't have in their offensive line. I think Northwestern is very Minnesota-esque, and they're more of a plotting, wear you down kind of team that produce more high-octane, high-variance play style. So it'll be kind of like a battle of wills. Against Minnesota, Purdue was really never able to put Minnesota away, even as we were massively – we had almost twice as many yards as they did in that game, and we were kind of marching up and down the field on them, but not really finishing those drives, and Minnesota kind of hung around until Purdue inevitably shot themselves in the foot repeatedly. I think the game script is going to be similar here, where if Northwestern is able to hang around long enough, they're going to have a chance to win it at the end. If Purdue wants to feel good about winning this game, they're probably going to have to put them away early and build a pretty insurmountable lead by like the midway point of the third quarter, because I do not trust this team late in games to close out wins.
Yeah, I think the good news is, though, is that Perrick type player. I think that, like, when I think back to the Minnesota game, I think back to part of what hurt Purdue is that Minnesota had a guy on the defensive end who was capable of like stepping up and making this game-breaking play. I mean, as bad of a decision as it was from Ryan Brown to throw that ball, I think it was still an incredible play by Perrick to make that interception and then take it back for a touchdown. Because the way that Purdue defense was playing, you talked about the turnover into a short field where they didn't give up a first down. That was a very real possibility from the defense. And if that happens, I think, Purdue all of a sudden gets a little bit of momentum off of a play that should have been backbreaking and ended up being. But having a player like that to be able to swing the game in a moment like that is just something Northwestern doesn't really have. And I think that bodes a little bit better for Purdue, like going down the stretch of a game. I think seeing a team like Northwestern that's a little bit more balanced in their play style and doesn't have that elite playmaking kind of guy like a Coy Perrick, it just bodes better for Purdue holding the lead. And I think that kind of goes back to my overarching point about how I just don't think this Northwestern team has a ton of like individual difference makers. And I think that is like the biggest possible matchup win that Purdue could have against anyone, is to have more individual difference makers, because their high octane play style relies on them having to have more individual difference makers. Because if they don't have more individual difference makers, the high octane plays oftentimes don't go their way. So I think that having more individual difference makers of high octane, and that'll lead to being able to put away a team like a Minnesota or Northwestern.
Yeah, I think you have a point there. In theory, as long as Purdue doesn't get in their own way, they have the talent on the outside. They have the running game to be able to close out games and to make big plays when they need to. And if Purdue's not giving Northwestern, not gifting them advantageous situations over and over again, they should be able to close out the game if they have a lead late.
Yeah, I agree with that. I would really like to see something. I'm really looking forward to this week, is to see how this offensive line plays. I think they've strung together a couple of weeks in a row where they've had definitely improvements. I think the Illinois game showed a lot of improvements. I think that the Minnesota game was the first game that I actually thought they played kind of well in general. I want to see that positive momentum keep going, especially against a team like Northwestern that I don't think should be able to overwhelm them defensively. I think a good sign for Purdue would be if this running game is able to establish themselves again, because if they're able to start finding this running game, I think this offense becomes a lot more stable. You talked about over 200 rushing yards against Minnesota. If they put up over 200 rushing yards against Northwestern, I think they should win this football game. I think that will allow them to stay on schedule. It'll put a lot less pressure on the passing game. It'll allow them to get into the RPO stuff a lot more, and that we've talked about Ryan Brown has had a lot of success in this year. maybe get a few easy catches for the receivers, get them going, and then all of a sudden, you can kind of get that offense clicking. I think it kind of goes back to how Barry Odom played at UNLV. I think that he wants to run the football. I think his teams want to run the football. I think even when he was at Missouri and had a quarterback like Drew Lock, to an extent, he wanted to run the football. He knew you couldn't win games in his style without being able to run the football. And so the more that Purdue's able to run the football, the more positives I think will come for this offense, even if they've had kind of flashier passing attacks.
Yeah, one guy I want to see get more involved is Armand Branch. That really electric week 1 performance, 3 catches, 101 yards, and a touchdown. He had a touchdown the next week against SIU. But since that week 1 performance, he hasn't had more than 2 catches or 35 yards in a game. He's just not really a factor in this offense right now. He's really been supplanted by Nitro Tuggle and Michael Jackson as like the go-to guys. But then even guys like Corey Smith and EJ Horton are more involved with the offense on a down-to-down basis. And it seems like beginning of the second half, there's like a drawn-up play to get the ball to Branch for like a 17-yard, dig route, and then nothing. And maybe he's just a guy that you really need to scheme up to get the ball to. And he's just not a guy you can let run routes and be a part of the flow of the offense. But one way or another, I want to see him more involved. I wonder if Odom and company can find a way to get him the ball.
Yeah, he's a guy that seems to be able to struggle to create, a ton of separation. But when he does manage to get the ball in his hands, he's a great open field guy. I think he's got a lot of electricity in the way that he carries the football. He's a big play waiting to happen. He just hasn't had the football time. I think I agree with you that I want to see Branch more involved, whether it's situationally, whether it's more every down. Just kind of getting him on the field more in general, getting the ball in his hands, I think will help this offense. I think Antonio Harris has also been one of those guys that has kind of shown a little bit of a big playability. You saw him last week against Illinois, I believe. He had the big run. I think that's a guy that they could do a little bit of a better job of getting more touches, because I do think that he's got some real speed and explosivity as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to see guys like that get more design touches as compared to a guy like Michael Jackson, who is a reliable possession receiver, but they're using him as a punt returner. They're like throwing him screens, like little whip routes to try and get him the ball in space. And he's just not a super dynamic after the catch threat. Like, he's the guy I want to go to on third down when I need 5 yards, and I want him to curl up into the soft spot in the zone and make himself available to the quarterback. He's not the guy I want to get the ball to on the perimeter and let him go break a guy down in the open field. And that's why I want to see Branch, like you mentioned, Antonio Harris, even guys like Malachi Thomas. I think can maybe be a little more dynamic there.
Yeah, I think Malachi Thomas showed a lot in that this week against Minnesota. He's a real threat carrying the football in a way that I didn't quite project him to be going into this season.
Yeah.
All right, on that note, I think we're going to call it for this episode. Hopefully this Purdue football team shows a little bit more against Northwestern, is able to pull out that win. Ideally, they cut down on the turnovers a little bit. I think that'll help us out a little bit.
Well, hang on. We still got to make predictions here.
You're correct. I almost forgot. Getting into predictions, I guess. We'll go run back to that real quick. I'm on ESPN right now. ESPN Bet has the line at 2.5 for Northwestern. This game is in Evanston, Illinois, so it'll be a road game for Purdue. Not that Northwestern is going to be bringing in a raucous atmosphere or anything like that, but they do have kind of a unique setup on the lake, and it is a road game, so 2.5 for the Wildcats doesn't feel too far off. I'll throw it to you against the spread first, but I'll let you get into your long-form prediction as well.
Yeah, so it looks like it opened at -3.5 for Northwestern, so it looks like people are betting Purdue a little bit to swing that line by a point. For the record, I do think 2.5 for Northwestern is the right number. That's kind of like, you think Northwestern's going to win by a field goal or more, or does Purdue pull out the win, basically? If you're betting Purdue against the spread, you should probably just bet the money line here as well. I'm taking Northwestern outright and against the spread in this game. This game scares me because it reminds me way too much stylistically of Minnesota, where I just do not trust Purdue in a close game right now, because unless we're significantly better than them, like we were against Ball State and SIU, inevitably penalties, turnovers, dropped passes, like all the things we talked about, are really going to slow this team down over the course of a game and keep giving the other team chances to keep it close. And then in a big moment, there's going to be somebody is going to have some sort of meltdown, a fumble on a punt return, a bad interception in the red zone, a pick. Like it feels like a roughing the passer penalty or a pass interference to extend a late drive that means we don't get the ball back, something like that. I just don't trust, and until they show me something different, I'm just going to keep picking against Purdue, which we've done. This is our fourth preview so far. I'm 3-0 picking these outright and against the spread. I'm just going to keep betting. I'm just going to keep betting with my gut here, and I'm going to take Northwestern.
Yeah, I think I'm going to be the voice of Purdue positivity yet again, and I'm going to disagree with you here. I think I'm going to go Purdue, and I think I'm going to go Purdue by multiple scores. I think I'm going to get bold here.
Ooh.
I think that Minnesota-Purdue game was not quite as close as the turnovers kind of made it seem. Obviously, there's a lot more than like play-by-play basis who's winning play-by-play, as Purdue showed, because play-by-play Purdue was a much better team than Minnesota. I think outside of the turnovers, you had the Maccabee interception, which is honestly that's the one that I want to completely throw out the window. Like that's a 7-point swing right there. You throw an interception on the 4-yard line on a busted trick play. Like I don't think that it's fair to hold that against this team in the long run. In the short run, yeah, obviously they didn't execute the play correctly. It was an interesting play call, didn't execute it correctly, and ended up in a turnover. But I don't think that's something you can expect to keep happening. I don't think this Northwestern team has the havoc play ability that Minnesota does. I don't know how much you've looked into it, but through 6 games, this Northwestern defense has total 9 sacks and 4 turnovers total forced. They're not even forcing more than 1 turnover a game. They've only had 3 interceptions on the season. They've forced 1 fumble. This is not a defense that thrives on chaos. And I think that defenses that create chaos are the ones that have success against Purdue's offense. I think it's the teams that force the turnovers, that force the mistakes that Purdue, kind of allows teams to force. Maybe I'm wrong on that. Maybe Ryan Brown makes some mistakes. Maybe you see the undisciplined nature, but I don't think that Northwestern has the style of guys who are going to go make an interception, go force a fumble, go get a sack that kind of ruins this Purdue team at times.
For the record, the voice of Purdue optimism is 1 and 2 against the spread as we've been doing these. I would agree with you in principle if this was like a 1-game thing, right? Because down to down, Purdue was the better team than Minnesota last week. We outgained them by almost 200 yards. We held the ball for 10 more minutes. We had like 5 more first downs. The issue was we had 9 penalties, 4 turnovers to Minnesota's 1, and we couldn't get out of our own way. And that's not just a Minnesota thing. It's hard for me to look at that game and go, I'm not going to, like, these freak play here, fluke here, bad mistake here, that's not going to happen again, because it is going to happen again. Maccabee's not going to throw another red zone interception on a busted trick play. Someone else will. Something else will happen, because that's what Purdue is at this point. We're 6 games into the season. I think we can draw some patterns here. We can stop saying, well, these are all freak plays, they're not going to happen again. Purdue loves to make those kinds of mistakes, and they're going to let teams hang around. And until I see them actually close out a game against an opponent that's roughly a similar caliber to them, I don't trust them to do that. Because there's a lot of teams in this general tier in the Big Ten that kind of all feel pretty similar, right? Purdue, Minnesota, Northwestern, Rutgers, UCLA, Michigan State, Wisconsin. I guess Penn State for right now needs to be thrown in that mix. Those all feel roughly the same. On any given Saturday, probably any of them could beat any of the others, right? But I don't trust Purdue against any of them until they show me that when it gets down to it, all 11 guys on the field are going to make winning plays, because they haven't done that at this point in the season.
Yeah, I think that's a fair viewpoint. I think that's certainly a fair viewpoint to have. Maybe this is part of it. Maybe I'm incorrect on my viewpoint in this. Part of this is I just view Minnesota as a better football team than Northwestern. I think maybe that's unfair to Northwestern, and maybe that's an incorrect way to view this. I just think Minnesota's a little bit better. I think they've got a little bit better roster. I think they've got a little bit better players. I don't really think that like Northwestern is wildly better coached or anything than Minnesota is. David Braun's certainly a solid coach, and they're not a poorly coached football team by any stretch of the imagination. But I don't think PJ Fleck is by a terrible football coach either by any stretch of the imagination. So I think that I just kind of give the edge to Minnesota, and I think that to an extent it's hard. It's just hard for me to pull takeaways from games against like Notre Dame and Illinois even and USC because I don't see Purdue as on a level playing field with those teams talent-wise. And it does not shock me for a team like this to make a bunch of mistakes against a team like that. I do think that against more talented teams, it is 100% fair to expect a lot of turnovers and a lot of mistakes and things like that nature against or from Purdue. I don't know if I expect that. I don't know how much that carries over to teams of Purdue's caliber. And I guess I probably should have done this before I got to this point, but I don't even know I don't even remember what our turnover situation was the first 2 weeks. Do you against Ball State and SIU?
I don't know if we had one, to be honest. I'll have to go back and check. Just a quick note on Northwestern because, you know, you were kind of mentioning you just think Minnesota is just kind of a worse team across the board. I don't necessarily think you're wrong in thinking that. But at the same time, Northwestern really hasn't done anything wrong. They've kind of taken care of business all year. Their only losses, so they lost to Oregon, and they lost in the season opener on the road at Tulane, which at the time we were kind of clowning them for. Tulane is 5-1. Their only loss is on the road at Ole Miss, who's top 5 in the country now. They beat Duke at home, a Duke team that is 3-0 in the ACC. So that's a lot of, transitive property, I realize. I just think that, to this point in the season, Northwestern hasn't really done anything wrong. They've kind of taken care of business, beaten the teams they're supposed to beat, lost the teams they're supposed to lose to, with the exception of Penn State. And that's a level of consistency that I don't know Purdue has in them.
Yeah, that's very fair. Purdue did. I'm going back and looking through game logs. Purdue did have one turnover through their first 2 games. It was the interception on the opening drive of the second half against SIU. Ryan Brown threw the interception. However, that's one turnover in 2 games. I think that is indicative of a team that when they are, the better team, when they have more talent, I think that's indicative of a team that kind of takes care of business more so than is really super safe with the football. That's, I think, where the question comes into play is this Purdue team talented enough on offense to take care of business and allow the defense to kind of repeat last week and give themselves a chance? I think that's the pathway for Purdue here. Is I do think that Purdue's offense is more talented than Northwestern's defense. It's kind of whether they click and are able to show that, or if they just, if they're not clicking again like they did that last week, your prediction is going to hold true. They're going to turn the ball over in a big spot. They're going to lose again.
I would argue Northwestern's Minnesota than they are to Ball State or Southern Illinois, but I will say this. If Purdue's offense is just that much more talented than Northwestern's defense, there's a chance we're able to build enough of a lead that whenever we do inevitably self-implode, it's not going to lose us the game.
Yeah, and I think that could happen based on my kind of if my viewpoint of the 2 teams in Minnesota and Northwestern holds true. I think that is kind of what happens. I think that would have happened if Minnesota was just a little bit worse. I think that ends up happening, and so I think that's kind of where I see this game. So on that note, I guess we'll do this for the second time, but we'll close out and hopefully get a Purdue win this week. We will have some more basketball-specific content coming soon. We have our Purdue versus Kentucky exhibition preview coming, and we also have kind of more of a season overview and how Purdue's stacking up nationally for this upcoming basketball season coming. So on that note, Ethan, I'll let you take it away to end the show.
Yeah, thanks for watching, everyone. Don't forget to like and subscribe, I think is what you're supposed to say at the end of these. We appreciate you tuning in. We'll continue to cover Purdue football even as basketball starts, though as we get into the tougher sort of closing stretch of the schedule, we're not expecting to win. Maybe we'll spend less time breaking down these football games and more time talking about our number one ranked basketball team. I think that's probably more fun for everybody, including us.
Yeah, the officially for once now we can finally say the officially AP number one overall ranked basketball team. So on that note, have a great rest of your week, Boilers. Hopefully we see you win against Northwestern.